Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Queer Legends, an oral history podcast. This episode is a little bit different than the others. In fact, this story is the one that inspired the entire series. It includes true and heart-wrenching accounts of deep personal loss and the queer community's fight to stay alive. Take care of yourself as you listen to this story.
We had a chapter of ACT UP in Montreal, and thank God for ACT UP in Montreal.
This is where we came from. This is where it started. It wouldn't have been a marriage battle if this hadn't happened. There wouldn't have been equality if this hadn't happened. They took discrimination to the limit when the way they treated our sick, and they didn't give a damn.
Those voices belong to Montreal writer and queer commentator Richard Burnett and Michael Hendricks, a longtime community advocate and co-founder of Montreal's AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, better known as ACT UP. Me? I'm your host, Shawn Dearn, a broadcaster and social impact journalist. I grew up in the West Island of Montreal, just a few hundred meters from the airport fence. I came out as a young gay man in 1992 and 93, still lifeguarding to pay for broadcasting school, just as Hendricks and his now husband, René Leboeuf, and other key Montreal-based activists were leading the battle for equal rights for gays and lesbians in Quebec. This same group fought against homophobic City of Montreal officials for years to create the Parc de l'Espoir, or the Parc of Hope, which is one of North America's oldest AIDS memorials. This story begins in October 2019 when I went for a walk with Richard Burnett to talk about Montreal's gay history, HIV, and Parc de l'Espoir.
I just kind of remember being really scared about HIV/AIDS in the 80s. I was just kind of freshly out myself, like when Rock Hudson and all these people started, dropping dead. And then it would only be later on that some of my friends would start passing away. And that would only be, I guess, as the 90s rolled around. But, the 1980s was a scary time. It was a death sentence. And there were some brave people that kind of stood up and said, we need help and we're not going to take this kind of crap from a lot of people.
Michael Hendricks was one of those brave people.
Thinking about HIV infection and dying from AIDS was never a popular idea, and most young gay men avoided it. It only really came into our lives when our friends started to die. And we didn't go to the Anvil. We didn't know in New York. We didn't know about these things. It was utterly amazing to us when people started to get sick and die. But when you've lost 25 of your closest friends, René and I did, everybody we knew died. It affects you. It changes your life.
I'm glad we are talking about it because I think it's important to remember our history. And a lot of our friends have passed away from HIV/AIDS, so I'm glad that you're doing this.
What about the next steps for the park? Any thoughts?
I hope they keep the park. I can't believe that there's a possibility of losing the park. It's in the heart of the village. It's kind of unbelievable. I don't know even what to say about that.
Parc de l'Espoir has been part of the gay village for as long as I've been openly gay, and in fact, there's not a part of my gay life where I don't have the park being part of it. The park is a place to mourn, it's a place to remember, and to celebrate the lives of thousands and thousands of Quebecers, most of them gay and bisexual men, who died of AIDS at the height of the epidemic back in the 1980s and 90s.
I'd say the crucible years of queer activism in Montreal was probably 89 to about 94. And there was, how should I call them? It was, there was the four activists I call, they were kind of like the mindset of the community. It was Michael Hendricks, who I've always said has done more for queer civil rights in this country than any judge or politician. Claudine Metcalf, Roger Leclerc, and Douglas Buckley Couvrette, may he rest in peace. He passed away from HIV/AIDS related illnesses many, many years ago. They were really kind of the brain trust of the community back from 89 and 94, and they succeeded in a lot of the stuff they did.
Michael Hendricks and I met for the first time in Parc de l'Espoir in October of 2019. He and his husband René Leboeuf and the late Douglas Buckley Couvrette New Yorker Blaine Charles and their ACT UP friends, as well as Roger Leclerc, who is the founder of Quebec's first HIV prevention program, demanded dignity for Quebecers who were dying of AIDS and better health care for those who were still living with HIV. It took several years fighting city planners and a political campaign to gain the support necessary to create the park. In the end, the Court of Public Opinion convicted the city's homophobic bureaucrats, and a newly elected city councillor helped give life to Parc de l'Espoir, thanks to ACT UP Montreal. That was back in the 1990s. There are very few park fighters left.
So there's be Roger Leclerc and me and René. That's about it. Most of them died or they left. They went on to other lives. Once the treatment came, life started again. Being in ACT UP and around ACT UP was based on being somehow associated with HIV infection, either as a friend, a supporter, a member of the family, or the person who was infected. And, being aware, woke as they call it today, to what it was, meant you had to be in contact. Not many people are in contact anymore.
Earl Pinchuk joined ACT UP Montreal as a volunteer in 1990. He worked alongside Hendricks, LeBeuf, and others, doing anything that needed doing just to make sure that ACT UP would win its war for equality.
One night, this would have been probably around the fall of 1991, we went to the park. We put up, I think at that time there were 1,200 Quebecers had died of AIDS. We put up 1,200 ribbons. And we also put up a fake City of Montreal sign with their logo. The city then, the next day, took down the sign and they took down the ribbons. So, of course, ACT UP being what it is, we went back the following week and put up, again, 1,200 ribbons and the sign. And, of course, then they took it down. I think we did it 3 times until they finally said, okay, we're going to sit down with you guys, because I think they realized we weren't going to stop.
ACT UP Montreal actually had a split over the ribbons in the park. You see, the red AIDS ribbon was the first ribbon. And at that time, the red ribbon was all the rage in Hollywood and in New York City. So when ACT UP Montreal discussed claiming the park at the end of the December 1st World AIDS Day demonstration, most francophones wanted to put up 1,200 black ribbons because red was too cliché and too American. Most of the Anglophones, including supporters from ACT UP New York, wanted red ribbons. So when the park got filled with black ribbons, drama ensued, and with several members storming off in protest, citing a lack of solidarity. Well, as Earl Pinchuk said, the city took the ribbons down and ACT UP planned for the next week. In the end, as Michael Hendricks told me in an email, the majority settled on 1,200 rainbow ribbons to represent the full range of people affected by and infected with HIV. So, I started this project in the summer of 2019 after my husband, Ian Capstick, was contacted by Canadian reps of Bono's Global AIDS charity. They had funds to clean the park, and they wanted to host an event there during Montreal Pride. So, long story short, calls to the city, cash in hand for a pressure washing of the park, and the City of Montreal couldn't get its act together, and the Park of Hope was neglected once again. When I met Hendricks a couple months later, he told me history was repeating itself all over again. Not long before our meeting, City of Montreal officials told him about some plans they had to refresh the park.
And we asked, well, have you consulted any of the AIDS groups or people living with HIV? Oh, I don't know, it's a long list, says the man. And one of the freelancers there says, oh, I have it in my phone. And he starts reading them off. And it's old age homes and garderies for children. And there's no AIDS groups. There's one lesbian group being consulted. There's a Centre communautaire, a community center. They're not very much involved in the AIDS struggle. It was like incredible.
So they're currently consulting on the future of this park without speaking to the gay community and the gay men's organizations who are most affected?
They certainly, yes, they are certainly not speaking to the people that represent the HIV positive community, and they certainly are not talking to the various organizations that support them. They say they will, now that we made a stink about it, they say they will present their plan to us. But they gave us kind of a hint of what it was. They showed us some slides.
More than 25 years after winning the battle to create Parc de l'Espoir, the same group of men were now having to fight to protect it from the borough's refresh, those slides that Hendricks mentioned earlier.
They seem to have a thing about these black stones here.
Long rectangular black granite stones, a place to sit with friends, have a coffee, people watch at the heart of the village, and to represent tributes. Many think of them as coffins, for remembering the lives and the spirits of the men and women killed by AIDS in Quebec.
This part of the park represents death, that part represents life. If we got one thing important out of all this, we got them to put up a little bitty sign here, and that was in 2012, that actually tells the story of the park. A little bit of it anyway. Well, maybe we should go see it.
Yeah, let's go walk over. But I've noticed too they've blocked it.
Yeah,
They've blocked it.
Oh, that's normal here.
What does that say? What does that say then about their commitment to this park? When
They have no commitment to this park. It was imposed on them from the very beginning. The people in the Parks Department fought against this. It was a political decision by local representatives who are no longer there. And the bureaucrats were against the whole idea. First of all, what were we citizens doing, taking over and designating a park, designing the park? The theme, everything about it came right from the grassroots and not from them, which made them look irrelevant, at least in this situation.
In mid-November 2019, the Montreal borough of Ville-Marie sent a notice to residents saying that Parc de l'Espoir needs some love. While the community has been telling the city that for more than 20 years, and residents have given the park way more love than the city ever has. A public meeting was held December 4th, 2019, when the city's plans to refresh the park were revealed. And by refresh, they meant bulldoze completely. Earl Pinchuk agrees that the park could look better, but...
For me, it's up to 3 people to decide that. The 3 architects that worked on the project. I mean, we would not go into a museum and alter a painting, ever. So we should not be going into an area that has been designed by 3 people and just make a change.
Well, this is what some of the criticism has been from stakeholder organizations. They're saying, it's great you've got extra funds and you want to refresh the park, but nobody asked anybody in the community as to whether or not the park should be changed.
Because it's not just a park like here by the Lachine Canal that's named after whoever. Certainly it's important to the family and friends who knew that person. But this is a little bit different, this park. This is about the struggle of AIDS from the early 80s up until, I guess, 96. It certainly is still a struggle, but it's not the struggle that it once was. So it is very important for people, this park.
I asked them if there would be media when they exposed their plan, and the panic struck. And they said, no media. I've never known a group of people more mouthy and public about their opinions than HIV positive people. They have nothing to lose, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if this doesn't lead to some kind of reaction. I have no idea what.
Ce n'est pas un parc, c'est un cénotaphe.
Our community produced 3 pro bono architects, and they're the ones that designed the park as it is seen now.
There's this thing that happens when we are successful in fighting for something, in this case a park, where then the government that opposed it then wants to reappropriate it and pretend that it's theirs and that it belongs to them.
Nobody asked to change the park. It's the city who decide that they have a budget and they have to spend it before next fall, and they're going to do it. That's the problem, and we're going to try to stop that.
This is what our friends died for, and it's tough.
It was our war.
It was our war. It was our damnation, and out of it we rose like a phoenix to today's gay world. That's about it.
Do you go back there often in your mind and think about that time?
You can never forget them. They were our world. We don't have any friends left.
It's a pretty sad statement to make in this day and age that the city is not even consulting the gay community, the queer community, about Parc de l'Espoir. It's kind of, in a way, it's kind of typical of the history of relations between the queer community and the city. What does that tell you about Montreal? Everybody says this city is a queer mecca, but here we are still fighting for, for a plaque.
Have they forgotten their history? Have they forgotten that it took all of those deaths and this horrible experience of the AIDS epidemic in Montreal to bring us to 1993 when we had public hearings on the violence and discrimination done to gays and lesbians. And things started to change here. A few years later, we organized the first demonstration for marriage. And by 2004, we were married. And all of these things are major contributions. They all came right out of this park and the activism that surrounded this park.
ACT UP's style of activism started its influence in Quebec at the Montreal International AIDS Conference in 1989. It's where many of the city's early queer activists first met, and that contributed to a feeling of unity in the community, leading to many advances in queer civil rights in Montreal and across Quebec. Sandra Wesley is one of several key HIV stakeholders in Montreal, and she, like many others I spoke with, had little good to say about the Ville-Marie borough's consultation process.
I was part of one of those meetings. I was representing the TOMS, which is the network of all HIV organizations in Montreal, and they did not know what TOMS was. They did not know anything about HIV. The person from the city who's hosting this consultation tonight told us that as a gay man, he feels that no one in his community actually feels concerned by HIV anymore, and took great offense to the notion that community should be consulted. And I think that they're realizing now that this park is actually important, that people care, that people are still mobilized, that we're not all dead. We're still alive and we're still interested in this project. And I don't think they realize the significance
Is this the individual
of this park.
The white-haired guy over there?
Yeah.
The brown jacket?
Brown jacket guy, yeah.
It was definitely clear in the interview with Mr. Leclerc and the city bureaucrats when they started talking about how pretty they could make it. He said, you want to get rid of the black stones, right? And they said, well, they're ugly, they're morbid. And he said, they're not going. He said, that's our friends. That's the only thing we have to remember. Their spirits are buried there. There are people buried there? No, their spirits are buried there. Because
there were so many. How many funerals do you figure were held in this park?
Oh, hundreds at least. And remember, directly after the death, there were hundreds. But that would be in 94, 5, 93, 4, 5. The number of commemorations that were held here, there used to be tons of ribbons with names. Now there's very few. That has passed. The memory of this is all that's left of the memory of the AIDS crisis. That's it. That's what happened to us.
Between the police crackdown in the 70s and 80s on queer establishments, and then just kind of the police violence against queer Montrealers at Sex Garage, and just kind of basically ignoring, the realities of gay life and supporting the queer infrastructure in the city of a lot of the community groups and the village. It has always been like pulling teeth.
Richard Burnett has written about it and he's seen it firsthand, and it's not dissimilar to what I heard from the community about Parc de l'Espoir. City bureaucrats out of touch with the community, ignoring the people that they're supposed to be serving.
And of course the city likes to position itself as a queer mecca today because of, the power of the pink tourist dollar and stuff like that. The city has done incredibly well with pink tourism, and it has this image that it has to protect. But when you go beyond the facade, sometimes it's really quite shameful. I mean, the Montreal police did not even apologize for all the violence and the culture of homophobia within the police force until 2017. And they only did that a couple of days before Canada Pride, because
in an election campaign.
That's right, and there was a lot of publicity and a lot of pressure for the mayor at the time was Denis Coderre and the police chief to make a public apology, and of course they did, and it made them look good. But I mean, it took a lot of arm twisting.
Je veux offrir officiellement à la communauté LGBTQ+ nos plus sincères excuses. So I'd like to say that we had a tainted past in certain area, and the best way to cure it is to recognize it. The best way to reconciliate is to make sure that we recognize what happened. So there was some bad moment with the police force and the municipal administration from the City of Montreal, and I would like, on behalf of the municipal administration of the City of Montreal, offer my public apology. So we apologize for that purpose.
The SPVM wishes to express its regrets for the events that took place during different police operations in gay bars and clubs during the 60s to the 90s. We have learned a lot within our organization, and this with the support of the LGBTQ+ community. We have chosen to be part of the solution. We would like to sincerely apologize to the people that were targeted and marginalized and hope that with our words today, this helps them to turn the page.
Let's just say that neither Coderre's nor former police chief Philippe Pichet's apologies were heartwarming stuff. Many of the people whom police targeted and marginalized had their lives ruined by these raids. Many of them are dead now, making the apologies somewhat hollow. Here's Puelo Dearn. He's co-founder of Montreal's Diversité Festival, and he describes what those raids were like.
Cops raiding bars, brandishing machine guns and cameras, and those arrested would have their names and pictures printed in the daily newspaper.
The last big one was, I think it was in 1994 at Station C in the Village, and over 100 people were arrested. I mean, that was really the last big one, but it's kind of all contributed to this under siege mentality that we had in the village.
The week before the December 4th public meeting, I played email tag with the Ville-Marie borough's communications people for a bilingual interview, and I was left with the impression that we were good to go. But Brown Jacket Guy refused my interview after the meeting, and then he got mad at my questions about his consultations process.
Stop yelling!
I've never had to ask a PR guy to stop yelling at me before, let alone 3 times. I must have been blacklisted after that public meeting because the borough stopped returning my calls, so I started writing an unflattering opinion piece for the Montreal Gazette. I texted the executive committee for comment, and within an hour or so, I was offered an interview with Councillor Robert Baudry the very next morning. This was just a few hours before my Gazette deadline. Baudry is the councillor for the village and a member of the City of Montreal's executive committee.
Where have we come to now with the park since the meeting of the 4th? You just have said there's good news.
There's good news because first of all, it's a consultation in 3 parts. The first part was meeting the stakeholders along. All the people are involved, the creator, the designer of this park, because we have an opportunity to mettre en valeur this spaces in the heart of the LGBT village.
The borough emailed me a partial list of the stakeholders they consulted, and I spoke with the heads of several of them before that public meeting. None were satisfied, and 2 answered only by laughing at my question. These consultations were more about telling stakeholder groups about borough plans and not about asking for input.
Then we make a plan to present them different type of, because there was no consensus. There was this consensus in the community, so we make some plan to rearrange the park.
The only real consensus was that bureaucrats like Brown Jacket Guy were not listening to the community, and no one asked the borough to rearrange Parc de l'Espoir in the first place. Baudry stood by as bureaucrats and the consultation shitshow, but I could tell he'd done his homework. He'd at least read the report about the public meeting.
The people was very attached to the different part of the park. I mean, the block, whose some people said that it's like a tombstone, so you cannot move a tombstone. It's a no-go, absolutely. The pole also, it's remember people who attach
the ribbons
pieces, the ribbons there.
Every ribbon is for someone who's died.
It's for someone who's died. So we heard about the people that they was really attached to those elements of the park.
So you'll keep the existing park elements.
Yeah, we're gonna keep the existing park element in the new proposal, and we're gonna try to expand the park.
All in all, that sounded like a bit of good news for Parc de l'Espoir. But it wasn't the kind of political reversal I was expecting, at least not after the previous night's back and forth with Jimmy Zubris, an advisor to Mayor Valérie Plante. Baudry clarified that the comments from the December 4th meeting would inform the creation of a new 3rd design, which would then be put online for further comments from the community.
And if we don't have, enough support of the community, we ain't gonna go to
demolish it and start again or redo.
It's never a demolition, but we ain't gonna go to redoing this part yet, and we're gonna continue again to consult.
You might have heard me laughing there. This part of the interview actually kind of annoyed me. Baudry's in front of me, and he's saying that it's never a demolition, while just 2 weeks earlier, his bureaucrats presented design options to the public that would have erased Parc de l'Espoir completely. Not a single element from the original park would have survived this refresh. The borough's two design options were a desecration of the park and disrespectful of Hendricks, Leboeuf, Buckley-Couvrette, and Leclerc and everyone else who fought to create it, and they shouldn't have to be fighting for it all over again. As I wrote in the Montreal Gazette, Parc de l'Espoir doesn't need a renovation. It needs to be restored. It should be given a heritage designation under the City of Montreal's heritage policy, which would protect the memorial's original architecture and the intention of the park.
It's an opportunity to say, hey, this part of Montreal, it's a part of the history of Montreal, so we have to take care of it, and it's gonna be our duty to do it.
Considering the City of Montreal's long-standing opposition to the park and more than 2 decades of municipal neglect, I just have to take Baudry at his word and hope that he really understands why preserving this park is so important to Montreal's history. And if you still have any doubts, here's Michael Hendricks and Roger Leclerc on why they say this park's important.
Yeah, we made other friends who also, some of them died of HIV or other reasons, but it was never the same. These people were the people we had known since we were, late teenagers or early 20s. And, we all lived the gay sexual revolution together, and we saw what happened, and we shared this experience. And suddenly they just weren't there. And they weren't there within a period of about, the first one died in 87, last one died in 95. So it was constant funerals, and it was constant grief.
Have we recovered from that?
No, nobody ever recovers from that kind of a loss. It's just like whole chapters of your life are missing. And I'd like to say to Luc that, do you remember the time let's go back to a place we visited. But Luc is dead, and he'll always be dead. All I have is memories. And, we're two isolated old men. Everybody we know died. We know younger people, true. We know women that weren't infected. But in the gay world, our world was just wiped away. We tried to pay some kind of we tried to pay our dues by working in the AIDS movement. And I for years was an AIDS counselor at $15 an hour. I did all kinds of things. Lenny and I and many people in ACT-UP organized huge dinners like Christmas and Easter and Thanksgiving for people that were too sick to take care of themselves. We did this, all of it. It was never enough because, yeah, sure, it was a good thing to do, but it didn't right the wrongs. Didn't bring them back to life. Didn't make our lives better. It made us feel that we were doing our best. That was helpful.
Most of them were in the closet. So it's for them. This park is for them. It's not for me. I mean, all my life I was out in public, gay. These ones who died, most of them were so discreet, so they just disappeared in the society because they wanted that. And AIDS just put them out of that. I do remember in the houses some people who the family learned at the same time that he was seropositive and he was gay.
And he was dying.
Yeah. And so it's for them. This park is for their memories, not mine.
It's beyond just being an HIV memorial. It's sort of become the community rallying point whenever there's something of urgent need to know or share.
Well, that's exactly the design of the park. The architects designed the front part as a point of rallying, and you can get up and address the crowd on these blocks. It allows you a great deal. It's like a little theater. There have been theater pieces done here. The back part is supposed to be for, meditation and whatnot. But the front part was politically motivated, and it was to be a place to meet.
Parc de l'Espoir has been the place to meet since 1990 and remains the spot where Montreal's queer community comes together in protest and in celebration. Thank you for listening. This episode was researched, written, and produced by me, Shawn Dearn. The executive producer is Ian Capstick, and special thanks to Richard Burnett for taking a walk in the park with me that afternoon. Coming up in the next episode, a questionable online survey, compromises, construction through a pandemic, and inauguration of the new Parc of Hope on the eve of Montreal's 2021 municipal election. Queer Legends and Oral History Podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you go for great storytelling.